The question is that the motion be agreed to. A call,
Mr.
Claire
Speaker.
Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, in 2015, almost all of us are online. We are, as a population, increasingly spending more time online. We, as a population, are increasingly using these things, mobile devices, and the average age of usage of these devices is decreasing. And in fact, I read a piece of research today which said that in the Netherlands, 78% of toddlers and preschoolers are online. And I think that is quite sobering when you think about what the implications of that are for the coming generation. As our usage is increasing, though, so are the issues of bad behaviour online. And as the Minister has just listed, there have been some very high-profile cases of cyber abuse and cyber bullying in our own country in recent months and in recent years, and those have occurred on mediums such as social media, such as Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, on blogs and comments on news sites, on sites such as Trade Me in the commentary and forum sections, and they include things such as the high-profile Roastbusters case, the Charlotte Dawson issue and harassment online, and behaviour of bloggers such as Whale Oil. They include things like putting intimate photos online, embarrassing photos, pack behaviour, which has driven people to self-harm or contributed to self-harm. So there is no doubt about those things. There is no doubt about the fact that harm is being caused, and everything that the Minister mentioned in her speech around the issues that are arising and are growing in momentum is important, and I don't think anybody in this House would disagree with that. The big issue is what do you do about it, and whether the policy is right, and then whether the detail of the legislation which is being put in place is right. And that is where Labour has had its concerns. In 2012, the Law Commission reported to Parliament that the laws needed changing and that more New Zealanders had experienced harmful communication. And so the Harmful Digital Communications Bill was drafted as a result. We supported it at its first reading. When it came back from the Select Committee, we had enough concerns to raise those concerns in the House and not to support it. We have subsequently decided on balance to support the legislation, but we have very significant concerns with the legislation. We believe that it will end up back in this House for amendment sooner rather than later, and we have committed to review it. It attempts to do a number of things. As the Minister set out, it creates a civil enforcement and a criminal regime. It creates an approved agency as the first cab off the rank, the first port of call for people to go, which is a good thing. It creates a place for people to go to get more than advice, to actually get a process, a mediation process, a place for victims, parents and teachers to go particularly. It creates a safe harbour, as the Minister set out. Now, this is one of our main problems with this bill, though, because, and I've heard this described in the last 24 hours as a result of the amendments that the Minister's put forward on the safe harbour provisions, as being a mishmash or even a dog's breakfast. And this is one of the areas in this legislation that we have real concerns with how effective it will be. We're concerned that it actually may make the problem worse. The Minister talked about how quickly online information can travel around, go viral, as we say in the cyber environment, go viral and actually have a much bigger impact on somebody for a piece, whether it's a photo, whether it's a claim, whether it's a very harmful communication to somebody, threatening or whatever it is, but can actually go viral, and by the length of time that it is allowed up, actually can have an exponential effect and create more harm. Well, the safe harbour provisions in this piece of legislation actually create quite an extensive length of time, and where our concern is that in 48 hours is the first block of time when the victim complains, and where the complaint has to be put to the person that put up the offending matter, that 48 hours can go past before anything actually can be done about it, and then another 48 hours may pass before the piece of information is actually taken down. Now that's actually 4 days, and the Minister talked about how much damage can be done in an hour. So we have some significant concerns about that. We don't think that it's actually going to be that effective. And the other thing about the safe harbour provisions is that it doesn't state precisely the scope of the protection from legal liability for the ISP, for the host, for the online content host, which is how it's described in the legislation. So it doesn't actually spell that out. It also will allow the person who claims reputational harm to make a complaint, which could result in a takedown, or what they're calling disablement in the legislation, even though the usual path to follow would be that of defamation. So the question is, would a takedown have an impact on a measure of damages? I don't think that that this legislation considered that. I don't know if the officials properly considered that. In fact, the whole process was rushed through the select committee, and then we had a substantial set of amendments plonked in the House this week as an attempt to try and redress some of these issues. My concerns is that they've actually made them worse. The takedown regime allows for the removal of certain content without a consideration of whether or not it amounts to a harmful digital communication. So in essence, that amounts to a form of censorship by complaint without consideration of the substance of the content. So, Mr. Speaker, we're getting into detail here, but the detail is actually the important part of the legislation. It might be, you might have the intent to do good. This piece of legislation is an example of government wanting to do something about a problem. And it's a good intent. It's an intent that everyone in this House has, but actually what is come forward in the legislation may actually make the problem worse down the track, and that's what we're concerned about. We're also concerned about the criminal penalty that's being created, the new cyber in the site that only applies in the cyber environment, which has the potential to criminalise young people, and we believe that is a serious problem. One, because it only applies in the cyber environment, it's not comparable in the physical environment, and because it may apply to young people, and we believe that more thought needed to go into that. The definition of harm is very broad. There's no, it's a serious emotional distress. That is going to have to be tested in the courts as to what that actually means. There's no public interest defence, which raises threats to freedom of speech, which is the other side of the coin to cyber abuse, and there is no exemption being made for media. So in essence, Mr. Speaker, we are reluctantly supporting this legislation. We believe that it's going down the path of legality rather than addressing core issues that are largely facing young people. The voices of young people are missing in this piece of legislation. We believe the Minister has closed her ears to the practical concerns and principled arguments around the matters that I have raised today. I know that there are more issues that have arisen in this piece of legislation, but some of these are really fundamental issues. How long is it going to be before we have a court case where a cartoonist and a news media outlet is in the courts because a case has been taken using this legislation for severe emotional distress to a religious group or a person who feels offended by that? How long is it going to take before there's a 14 or 15-year-old who has been hauled before the courts? Those are the things that we are concerned about. We are reluctantly supporting this bill.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Jono.